deal with these characters. And De Niro was fine, Diane Abbott, Sandra Bernhard, Lewis was fine, Jerry Lewis, but I began to realize that ultimately, and it took about 90 some odd days shooting, and it was grueling for me because I didn't know how else to go through it except to live through Rupert and Jerry, and some of Sandra Bernhard too, Masha. And so I was very upset by the picture, but I couldn't show that to them. I was trying to keep my spirits up and that sort of thing, but it was a very disturbing film for me to make. And so I think part of that had to do with my own fantasies of what imagined lives would be, the imagined life of the celebrity, and then the truth of the celebrity life that Jerry reflects, the humor and the nastiness of it, which is, later on, with Jerry Lewis, Don Rickles, you get all of that in there. That one has to, deal with that humor comes out of very often other people's problems, and so one has to not shy away from that. One has to understand that. Ultimately, I realized after the making of that film that I better be on time from now on, because when I get there, I still have to go through it. You still got to do the day, you got to do the week, and then you got to do the month, and then you got to make the film. Or you have to go to this event, or you have to go to a friend's situation. These days terrible, but you go to funerals, you go to you go to memorial services. You've got to do it, and you might as well get there on time because it's not going to go away. And so I was reticent on that film. They all wondered why, but I had a hard time getting through it.
And I mean, being possessed by those three characters, that's an incredibly intense thing. It sounds exhausting.
It was very upsetting. The best part was finally the last few weeks, my mother showed up in the film, and she plays Rupert's mother, the voice above. He's in his basement, and that was his set. And we just put my mother up above, and we just had her improvise. She said, "What's that noise down there? Who are you talking to? Who's this Gerald you're talking to?" And at one point, he said, "Has so-and-so been down here?" He mentions the name of he invented a brother that he had, we improvised. And he said, is Gerald been down here? Or so, I forget his name. Has Sammy been down here? He's going into my things. I'm going to get a killer attack dog, and then we'll see. And she goes, "Good, another mouth to feed." And then De Niro started laughing, and I never saw him crack up in the middle of a take. And he put his back to the camera, started shaking his shoulders, laughing. I said, "What's he doing?" My mother would not take anything from him, whatever was going on. So that opened up, but that was the last few weeks of shooting. But for me, I found that, particularly the scene where he shows up at Jerry's house with Diane, and they start dancing, then Jerry shows up, and it's mortifying. I know it's a comedy of errors. It's a comedy of manners, right? Is that what you?
Yeah, yes.
Don't forget that film was a complete disaster at the box office. No one went to see it in America. It had a following in England. And I remember it was right after. Yeah, they liked it very much, picked up on it. But in America, what had happened with that picture was right after Raging Bull, the film that 2 years later to come out with De Niro and me directing, I think audiences expected something more along the lines of Raging Bull, and they didn't want Rupert Pupkin at all. So in effect, I guess Rupert became, I think, our culture, really, in America. Yeah.
It's more and more relevant, I think, in many ways. I mean, reluctantly, because I know this is going to be the challenge today, sort of wanting to stay with subjects, but to try and keep what we want to get to. And you've just been talking about your mother. I'm interested. I come from a family who were not intellectuals and they weren't artists. So, becoming a filmmaker, I had to sort of, find in the dark myself how to be. And I wondered, it's similar for you. Not the same exactly, obviously.
Yes, it was. It was. I mean, naturally, they weren't. They were born in on the streets in the tenements, not in hospitals. They were the children of immigrants from Sicily. And basically they were only interested in survival in New York, didn't really go to school. So the art around me was through radio, television, when we had a TV. The street was very much great storytelling. Storytellers on the street corners or in sitting around the table at night. My mother telling stories, my father, my uncles, this sort of thing. There was a cutoff. There was another language issue which I reacted against. I didn't want to learn the Sicilian. My grandparents seemed to be from another planet in a way.
You didn't want to?
No, because I sensed there was something else outside besides this world that they were in. Yeah, and part of that had to do with being, finding myself in the church around the corner, St. Patrick's Cathedral, a young priest who was like our mentor, who gave us Graham Greene to read, and James Joyce. And so for me, I knew there was another world out there. And so I had to do this in a way on my own. We would see these films, come back to our apartment, my apartment, where I was living with my parents and my brother. And the best time for me was between 3 o'clock after school and 5:30 when my mother got home. And I would have to go down and help her with the groceries or whatever, because they would buy all the groceries fresh right there. And between those 2 hours, within those 2 hours, I was able to draw little stories, little drawings. Later on, I realized that they were like storyboards, in a way. I was already planning camera moves and close-ups. The reason was that we couldn't afford a camera. And a friend of mine down the block had a camera, and so later on I started playing with an 8mm camera. But primarily it was my drawings, and in a way, I did everything from the 1:3:3 aspect ratio, westerns, all sorts of stories. Then widescreen hit, and I had longer widescreen 2:5:5 aspect ratio Roman epics, which I never finished. Made my own frames, yes, and had my own little theater that I'd push it through. I'd show it to only one person, one or two people, and two of the more, not street guys, they were more intellectual, put it that way. But they insisted that the images didn't move, and I insisted they did move. Mm-hmm. They did, because you have to go from the cut. In other words, the frame, not the next frame, so you have to imagine that the last frame now becomes this frame. Well, how did that happen? Is it a cut? Is it a move? And that sort of thing. And so, really, it was teaching myself all this. My parents, I would hide it from them because,
so they didn't see them. Yeah.
No, I would hide them because I was sick all the time. And, quite honestly, they didn't know what to do with me. My brother and he had difficulties too, but troublesome. You could see a lot of it's reflected in the movies they make, but the two brothers. He was 7 years older than me. Was very loving, the family, but he was a very, at times, sadly troubled guy. And so it was a very difficult place. I didn't want anybody to see this stuff except two of my friends. And because my father saw me doing it once, and he was concerned that,
about what?
Well, I brought into the house two books, one on the Russian Revolution, by Alan Moore, and the other on Greek art.